Welcome to the first episode of International Web Effectiveness Podcast. The goal of this podcast is to present a series of discussions on why we call the why, understanding why you need to do something rather than just doing it. So Bill Hunt and I are going to delve into the concepts of international web effectiveness. It's not just about having a localized website, but also ensuring that it serves all stakeholders, customers, business units, partners, etc., on a global scale. And in this first episode, we're going to dive deep into the world of international SEO and explore the notorious headache-inducing topic of HREFLang. So, Bill, how you doing?
I'm good. Looking forward to this and cracking the code on international.
Good. Me too. So you've been writing a lot lately about the challenges and the frustrations of HREFLang tag. In one of your articles, you listed several challenges. And, why don't you tell us about why you wrote it and what's in it?
Yeah, I wrote that. So Gary Ish from Google had posted that he was at yet another conference and people were complaining about HREFLang. And he said yet again, we maybe need to find another solution to this. And my first thought was, why can't we fix what we have? And so I actually wrote two back to back. One was the first that you mentioned, why is it so annoying? And I listed 6 reasons. And then I've since added a 7th, which was really one of those things you and I can talk about, that it's not really an SEO thing per se, but it is a reason why. And then the second article was really, what are some options for us? And one that I mentioned there is, again, fix the problems. And these things that I identified were, there's a lot of misunderstanding about HREFLang itself, what it does, how it works, its purpose, the web infrastructure, chaos, organizational issues, rigidity of the syntax itself, CMS challenges, lacking data. And then the last one, which hopefully we get some time to talk about, is this perfection paralysis, where we won't deploy HREFLang unless it's completely perfect. So any one of these, really, if we break them down, why SEOs hate HREFLang and why they want to get rid of it, which, interesting, other than some of the AI functionality, it's the only thing Google's ever brought out that we wanted to get rid of. And the reason they want to get rid of it is because it's hard to get right, and it's hard to audit, it's hard to fix. And I think that was the catalyst for us too, right? There really wasn't nothing in the marketplace for people beyond information about domains and maybe some localization on really how to manage a global website. So that's what it was. It was really, sort of my rant about, there's a bigger problem than HREFLang itself.
Yeah. And over the years, we commiserated about all of the implementation tries we have and client fails, or and in a lot of cases, client successes. But I think that one of the things you just touched on was you don't have to get it all right. So, when I think about it doesn't hurt to try. And especially if you only take it at a small chunk at a time. What do you think about that?
Oh, totally. I mean, you've absolutely nailed it. A small chunk, whatever that may be, right? And we both have talked to people about phasing this in. The first thing is, where does it hurt the most? You fall off your mountain bike, and did you hurt your head? Did you hurt your back? Did you hurt your arm? Which one is hurting the most is the one you want to sort of, deal with. And I think I always tell people, let's start where either a manager is complaining, somebody in the UK saying, hey, the US is stealing my traffic, or, maybe we see cannibalization. And let's start with that. Let's fix that. Let's make that a proof of concept. Let's sort of get started with something. And I think your point, that's the key, like, let's do something, and whatever method it is. And I think that's one of the beauties of HREFLang, is it is flexible with different methods, that you can do something relatively quickly, despite how complex it may seem. Get something out the door, test it. Oh, wow, man, that traffic problem I had with the US cannibalizing UK, that manager doesn't bitch anymore. So success, how can we do that for the next 4 or 5 markets?
Yeah. I Boy, I just realized I probably know you more than 15 years. But I remember I had contacted you one time way back then, not really an expert at HREFLang at the time. And I had a client where the US site was basically dominating every English market. And we came up, I was trying to put together a proof of concept to get some budget. And we came up with the idea of, well, let's just put some tags on the homepage. And we did that, and boom, it like in 3 days, it just fixed the problem.
Right. Tags on the homepage, if you've got a CMS that can do it, like if you're on WordPress and you can just simply paste that in, right? That's pretty easy to do, like the homepage. If you can't put tags on your page, if you can't, just paste them in or add them through some plugin, then use XML sitemaps. You can build one just in Notepad. You don't need a fancy builder or tool. Take 4 or 5 of the key pages that are being cannibalized, same language markets. So your example, there was English, do some of your English markets, put them in an XML sitemap, get that loaded, and go from there.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, but that probably would have been easier at the time. Never thought of building a sitemap that only had a few files in it. But so yeah, so that everybody knows, you can create a sitemap alongside your XML sitemap.
Absolutely.
And what would you do? You'd link to it from the robots text file?
Yeah, you can. It's the same 2 methods. It's a sitemap. So you can either put it in your robots text file or you can submit it directly to Google. Bing really doesn't process hreflang, so you don't necessarily need to submit to Bing. A lot of people will often just submit it directly to Google. On that note as well, a hreflang XML can do double duty. It can be both a regular XML because it has all the URLs. Definitely not if you're just cherry picking a few that are being cannibalized, but you can use both, or you can use just the hreflang to do double duty.
Yeah. I think one of the other things people don't realize is that it has to be bi-directional. And, if Google's not indexing all your pages, you could have a problem there. You want to describe that for people?
Yeah, so I think this is one of those big misconceptions people have, that if I set it on one, like I do one path, like I set it on the US site because I have control over that, then I'm good to go. This is why I've always been a fan of XML sitemaps, because the bidirectional reciprocation is done automatically. You can have both ways in the single file. So what Google needs to do is make sure that if you're saying A is equal to B, that you're also saying B is equal to A. And I think for a lot of people, they don't think that's important. And I find the people that think that way tend to be people that have subfolders, because everything is in one container. It's on a, mysite.com/fr or DE or UK. But what if you've got 2 totally distinct top level domains? Google doesn't know that both of them are yours. And so because of that, it needs the it needs verification. A needs B, B to A. So that's critical. If you don't have that, any market where it can't get the verification, it's not going to accept that pair. It's just that simple. If it can't verify that you have permission to do that, then it's not going to take it. And again, for me, that's the beauty of using XML, because on web pages, let's say you have 30 markets, it's got to make that round trip between all 30 pairs, to validate that. So if you've got problems with crawling or any number of reasons, it may see sometimes, like in your example, you said it was in 3 or 4 days, it was fixed. And that was great. It was a homepage.
Yeah.
Google's always dinging your homepages, where if it's an internal product page, it may take exponentially longer to visit all those pages. Again, that's why I'm a fan of XML, because Google's able to get the reciprocation and a list of all the pages in that single extraction.
Yeah. So when you see all of those crawled but not indexed pages, that basically breaks the reciprocation.
Exactly, because it hasn't done that process yet.
Yeah.
That's exactly a key point. And that's the first thing I tell people. They say, well, my hreflang isn't working. It's like, well, go in and see, has Google visited those pages? Using that simple last fetched parameter that you can get out of Screaming Frog. If you turn on your Search Console API, in Screaming Frog, it will tell you. So if you implemented in-page HREFLang last Monday, and Google hasn't been back to 90% of those pages in the past month and a half, then clearly it doesn't know the reciprocation. So that's that is a problem that you now have to wait. You could try, submitting some of those pages, the key pages at least, to try to get Google to hurry up their fetch and render. But yeah, I mean, that's a common problem is people, this is why we tell people clean up the mess in Search Console to make your site more friendly and encourage Google to want to crawl more, especially if you're using in-page tags.
Yeah, and I guess by definition, HREFLang would potentially solve a lot of that problems if Google could crawl a sitemap, HREFLang sitemap, because Google realizes now that they're all connected pages, they're not duplicates.
Right. You just have the block saying the US is equal to these pages, and you have a reciprocating block in your XML that says, these UK pages are equal to these US pages. And that can be in a single sitemap or a sitemap for the US, sitemap for the UK. And you can see this in Search Console, right? When you submit your sitemap, Google will come back with a flag. It said, hey, we found 252 pages or 252 URLs, right? So you've got some almost immediate verification that they've at least seen them, and then run the same process. And I've had people that challenge this thought and tell them, just do a test, take 10 pages, put tags in, take 10 pages, 10 different pages, put them in an XML sitemap, and then run that test and see which one Google shows it's visited more frequently or more recently. And in 100% of the cases, it's always the XML sitemap. And so that's one of the reasons John Mueller tells you it's a great way when you're launching a site, a new refresh or something like that, or a new market, to use XML, because then Google's seeing all those in the context of HREFLang. And then it doesn't get the duplication view. Like you just launch, you clone your US site to Latin America. And it's like, yeah, I've already got a few of these. I don't need them. But if you've got HREFLang in there, you're essentially stating the purpose as you start.
Hey, this is Bill Scully. I just wanted to let you know that we have a free training course called Demystifying HREFLang. It includes 6 modules and is over an hour long with a quiz at the end of each module. You can find it at internationalwebmastery.com. Hope to see you there. So we're trying to keep this to 30 minutes every week. We've got about 10 minutes left. It's amazing how fast time goes. I know you've done surveys in the past, and you've probably spoken to more people about HREFLang than anybody in the world. Like, what do you think are some of the top frustrations for SEOs?
I think number one is that people, it's hard to implement because of what we call website infrastructure chaos, that for many people, no two markets are aligned, because a key part of HREFLang is, in addition to setting the language and market, you're also saying these are the alternates. And if you got localized URLs or totally different URL structures, that makes mapping those alternates very hard. And that's a big frustration for people. Now, if you've got a cookie cutter website, same URL structure in every market, English URLs, I mean, you can click a button and generate that. That's simple. I think the other one is, if I had to pin down another one, I think it's the rigidity of the HREFLang syntax. And I use rigidity because it is fairly structured. And to me, it's very interesting how many people feel the need to deviate from the rules. Why do we think we can break the rules? And you talk about a survey. I did a survey about, because somebody posted a question, said, why are all the country language tags almost always broken, different than what they should be? And why do developers think they can do whatever? And when I saw that I asked the very question, why, if you've have or had invalid, language and country tags, why was that? And I gave four answers. Was I didn't read the guidelines. I copied my competitor. It was because of my CMS, or because I needed something different than what the guidelines allowed, right? So And 80% of the people fit into the bucket. 40% said, I didn't read the rules. I just did it. Another 20% said, I just copied what my competitor had. So again, that blind faith that big companies get shit right. And then the
right there. So there was another survey. What didn't you have a number? How many sites did it wrong?
Yeah, it was like almost 60 some percent had one or more. And it's close to 80% of people that have a region, whether that's, their Latin America is the one that people always, joke about that, somehow people think ESLA, the abbreviation, if you will, for Latin America, is for Latin America, but it's Laos. And I've had developers tell me Google should be able to figure that out. It's Spanish and my site, what is it, directory says this is Latin America, so they should know. Why do we put so much burden on Google to figure this out? EMEA, people seem to think that they can use ME, which is Macedonia, or we can use AP for APAC, or the one I saw the other day was AS for ASEAN, and that's America Samoa. So it's almost 80, I'd say probably close to 90% of people that have regional sites get that coding wrong.
So I've never thought about this, but I would guess that there is only a code for countries. There's no other.
There is no region, period.
And there's no other. It has to be a country.
Right. Because again, you're saying this language is for this country.
Right.
And this was the thing I put in my notes is that, we could have a whole session on sort of geopolitical correctness. Wars have been fought over language and keeping language. So I know why Google uses the politically correct phrase language region, because, you don't get into geopolitical fights. But it literally is a market. We need to think of it, what market is this for? And if we could do that, this would be a little easier, because I've had people say language region and interpret that to mean it's literally a region.
Right. And I just want to stop you there. When you say market, you mean country.
Country. I mean, as marketers, we market to markets, but it's country. The specific definition is it's a country ISO code.
Yep.
And if you're using a country ISO code, there's no way to shoehorn in a region, despite some people have said that you can use EU. EU is a economic and, sort of rules region. It's not a country. And within it, it's 18 or 19 official languages and 22 spoken languages. So that's another one that people get incorrect.
But you could assign a regional page to multiple countries.
Exactly. And the recommendation that we've historically gave is you can set it to one. You can do three things. One, you can set it to, if it's your only Spanish site, you can set it to Spanish, right? But if you have other Spanish sites, you can say, okay, the dominant market for me or my LATAM strategy evolves out of Panama, so I'm going to set it to Panama. And then option three, I can set that LATAM region to 22 Spanish-speaking markets in, Central and South America, and it just means you got 22 lines in your HREFLang. But what you're saying is this language region, for whatever reason, I only have a language region, I have a regional site, is applicable to all of these markets. Now, if you're not selling or can't sell in Chile and Peru, then you don't need to list those. But if you're targeting 4 or 5 markets, then you can list those 4. And it doesn't prevent you from showing up in another market, but it's really saying use this regional version specifically, because what if you have a Mexico and you have a Spain and you have a Chile site, and then you don't include Peru in that mix, for your regional, the rest of the Spanish markets, then any one of those are fair game to show up. But if you make the regional explicitly set, hey, Peru is part of this regional, then Google's going to use the Peru is the choice.
So another confusion is the X-default. So you can only assign one X-default.
One region or market site, one country language site to it. Yes.
I have a global site, not doesn't have any language about a specific country. You set that for the X default. Now you just brought up that you might have, 2 or 3 different Spanish sites specifically targeted to 3 Spanish countries. You might take one of them and make that the preferred for everyone else that's looking for Spanish. Would you, like, if I'm searching in Spanish on a Spanish search results page, and I don't map to one of the 3 Spanish sites I've defined in HREFLang, do I end up in the default or do I end up on a Spanish page?
Google will pick one. Well, so here's the interesting nuance in this. If your language preference in your browser and your query is in Spanish, Google's going to give you one of those 3 Spanish that it thinks is the most applicable, most relevant. If let's take Peru, for example, let's refine your query even more. You're doing a Spanish language query. You have a Spanish language set as your browser language preference, and you do that query in Peru. If you don't have any market set to Peru, and you've set three languages, the Spanish to those 3 markets explicitly, Google will show one of those 3, whichever one it thinks is the most relevant. If you've set one of those to also be equal to Peru, it will show that one. But if you did a query, like if you did a query for a particular, Nike or New Balance running shoe, that English query, Google would typically show either A, the most relevant English language site, because there's no language or market inference in your query, or if you have an X default, it will serve the X default. And I just want to make a couple clarifications of X default. X default originally, its explicit purpose was for you to set a country language selector. Sites like FedEx, UPS used to do this. IKEA does it still, where when you go to IKEA.com, it doesn't IP detect you. It actually brings up a selector for you to say where you want to go. The purpose of that was to show that to people on those type of queries. Then it's evolved to where you can take if you have a global English website, like a global EN or a site without any market designation to it, you can set that to X default. And then the third one, which is one that we've been using quite a bit on companies like IBM and you've done it with Absolute, where Absolute.com has an IP detect that then routes you to the appropriate market based on your location. We then set the Absolute.com or the IBM.com explicitly as the X default. Then Google will show that page in markets where people are doing the query. Everywhere else, it's going to, default to the IP detected version. So those are really the 3 use cases for it. But a big problem is, like you said, Australia thinks they should be the X default on their website. So they may set it, the UK may set it, Germany may set it, and you end up having an X default that's totally broken because everybody set it incorrectly.
Yeah. Man, we've run through the time. Why don't we end it at this, unless you have why don't you wrap this up? We had some other ideas for our next show, and I'll introduce that after your wrap up.
Sure. Yeah, I think, I just want to leave us with a couple, key thoughts. Like you said at the beginning, let's break it into phases. Let's do something, figure out where we can allocate our time, focus on prioritization. And, I got to give a plug, if you've got any questions about any of this, obviously we've got a variety of courses, which I think you will wrap up. But next time, I'd really like us to talk about, oversimplification of domains. There's a research report that came out that said that, the majority, I think it was like 56% of all the top 3 positions were people that had CCTLDs. And I think our plan is to delve into the non-search thought process around domain structures. There's many other reasons. And I think your experience with working with some of the largest companies in the world can help us get insights about why that happens. So that's next. that we'll talk about. And again, I just like to say we want to focus on these issues about how to improve your international web effectiveness.
Yeah, that was a great wrap up. Thanks. We're planning to do this on a weekly basis. If you're listening to this, please subscribe. Hey, this is Bill Scully. I just wanted to let you know that we have a free training course called Demystifying HREFLang. It includes 6 modules and is over an hour long with a quiz at the end of each module. You can find it at internationalwebmastery.com.